business leaders are worried about free trade and the tariff wars, but they're also worried about a shrinking workforce. For instance, if we build more roads, maybe we'll have fewer workers to build apartments. Are people willing to work more? The welfare payments are generous in Germany, and something has to be done to make sure that people who can work do actually work. It should be a reason to rethink our industrial policy.
Germany is embarking on a massive spending plan, but is it enough to get the country growing after 2 years of recession? To find out, let's bring in Clemens Fuest, president of the Ifo Research Institute. Clemens, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz met with business leaders from the country's top companies this week, and together they announced a $630 billion investment in the country. Where exactly is that money going to go, and are we talking about new funds or about projects that were already planned?
I'm afraid we're talking about projects that were already planned, though not all of them. So the idea is that 100 billion will be additional investment. But again, it's very hard to determine what does it mean additional relative to what. I think the good news is there is a relatively large number of companies now, including foreign companies, who give a signal, a strong signal stating, yes, they want to invest in Germany. That's a lot better than the news we've heard for months before, where companies have tended to say, no, we are cutting down our investment in Germany. So I would say it's good news, but it's not really entirely additional investment.
So the shift really is a psychological one primarily. Germany is taking on a whole lot of new debt to finance this spending, though. If I remember correctly, you've always been a bit cautious about reforming the debt brake. Are you confident the government is introducing the reforms needed to ensure this spending leads to meaningful growth?
I think that's the key point here. So raising money, using public debt to spend more is relatively easy. But this money needs to be spent well. It should be spent on investment, on infrastructure projects that have a return in the future and not on consumption. And that's only partly guaranteed, I would say. And then it needs to be complemented by reforms, because if we want to build more infrastructure, someone has to build it. So people have to build it. We need more labor supply. How do we get more labor supply? We need to deregulate our labor market. We need to reduce red tape, because currently a lot of people are busy dealing with red tape. So if we reduce that, yes, we can have more infrastructure spending. What we don't want is crowding out of private investment. That may happen. For instance, if we build more roads, maybe we'll have fewer workers to build apartments. Then the impact on the economy will be limited. So there's a lot to do here, and the complementary reforms are still missing.
If we stay with that issue of labour shortages, are you confident that the government actually has a plan to, address this problem?
I think this is on their mind, and for instance, they have discussed reforming social transfers to the unemployed. They have discussed making greater efforts to get people into work. To find jobs for the right persons, to improve the labor market matching. So some work has been done here, but what we really need is more profound reforms for many people who work more in the middle to low wage area. If they work more, if they earn more, they lose a lot because social transfers they receive are reduced and they pay taxes. These things need to be reformed, and so far, the government hasn't agreed on the necessary reforms. So I think it's on their mind. Yes, they have understood there is an issue, but they haven't really got their act together to address that.
These seem to be domestic reforms in the labour market, though. What about bringing in more skilled workers from abroad? What's the new government doing about that?
That is an opportunity, and I think in the past we have seen a number of reforms trying to bring in more skilled people, but there is significant competition for these people. In previous years, a lot of people came to Germany from Eastern Germany, from Eastern Europe, but in these countries wages have risen, so fewer people are coming. And in immigration policy, this government has an issue because immigration is increasingly seen critically because there have been cases of attacks. There is a debate about asylum seekers. This is different from labor market immigration, but this is a politically complex and really difficult subject. And that's why the government hasn't really put emphasis on saying, we are going to bring in more people from abroad.
Does that mean that we should all expect to be working longer hours then, if this is a problem that primarily has to be solved by people who are already here?
The question really is, are people willing to work more? Work hours in Germany per employee and per person in the workforce are the lowest in the OECD. So there's, in principle, that you would say there is a lot of room. But if you ask people why do they work part-time, it's often women who are working part-time, and they say we need to look after our children, we need to look after elderly family members. So childcare has to be improved. Care for the elderly needs to be improved, and if we succeed in doing that, we'll also have more labor supply. Of course, the other issue is, do people who are unemployed have the right incentives to seek employment? There is a debate about that. The welfare payments are generous in Germany, and something has to be done to make sure that people who can work do actually work rather than living on social transfers.
But that said, the unemployment rate in Germany isn't particularly high. So do you really think that would make a tangible difference?
It would make a difference. So we still have 3 million unemployed. It's a large number of people. It's true. It's less than in the past. And overall, I think it's not enough to focus on just one thing. We need to focus on these different areas. When do people? At what age do people retire? Could they perhaps retire later if they are still fit? Could they start working earlier? Could people work less part-time and more full-time? And can we improve incentives for the unemployed? I think all of that needs to be addressed.
These would be quite unpopular reforms. Do you think this new government is willing to, say, higher the retirement age?
That's a key obstacle indeed. It's not very popular. So there will be controversial debates. What the government has said is we will delegate this to a commission of experts. But the danger is there will be a nice commission. The experts will discuss, and the report will then end up in some drawer. So this really is a difficult subject. But in the end, if more and more people are retiring and the workforce is shrinking, the hope is that there will be enough pressure so that the government can agree on some meaningful reforms.
Another thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned this issue of women working part-time. The participation in the labour force is higher in Germany for women than in many other countries. Also, the birth rate is relatively low. How do you square those two things?
Yes, the birth rate is low, and women often only work part-time. There is evidence that in countries where childcare is better, people have more children and women work full-time. So I think the challenge today really is that women understandably want to have a professional career. And they want to have children like men. And so they need to cooperate, couples need to cooperate on this, and we need to create conditions so that women and fathers, women and men, do no longer face the choice between either having a professional career or having children. This has to be reconciled somehow, otherwise we are not going to make progress.
How important do you think it is that fathers get the message that they perhaps could work less so that mothers could work more?
I think it's very important, or maybe both could work more. In surveys about why people work part-time, women typically answer it's childcare, it's care for the elderly, and answers given by men are different. And that does demonstrate that equality between men and women really isn't there yet. So it seems to be that just informally, women feel the responsibility or are given the responsibility in families more than men to look after children and the elderly, and it's not clear why that should be the case.
Interesting. Now, German industry is facing huge problems right now, whether in the form of tariff threats from the US or intense competition from China. Your institute regularly surveys business leaders about how they're feeling. What are your latest findings?
So our latest findings is that business leaders are saying, yes, the situation is improving, but very slowly. So the mood is at a rather low level. And in the last 6 months, we've seen improvements, but it's going very slow. It's a very sluggish recovery. Business leaders are worried about, of course, free trade and the tariff wars, but they're also worried about red tape, about a shrinking workforce, about regulation, which is, especially in Europe, regulation which is often misguided, too restrictive, emphasizing risk rather than opportunity. Business leaders are concerned about energy policy in Germany and the cost of energy supply, which is extremely high. So there's a lot to do here, a lot to address before things get better.
Speaking of companies who have their worries, we've just seen Volkswagen announcing a drop in quarterly profit. What will it take to turn the fortune of Germany's car makers around?
So one thing is, of course, US tariffs hitting the car industry in particular. One question is, key question is, will the agreement with the US include the car industry? If it is a tariff of an overall tariff of 15%, that would be better than 25. But then there are, of course, the more profound challenges. German companies have been struggling with the transition to electric cars. They've been struggling with the growing role of IT, autonomous driving. This new world of mobility is something that changes the market entirely. And in the past, German car companies haven't been innovative enough to deal with that. And now they are facing enormous difficulties in the Chinese market, in the US market. And these are the two key markets for German car exporters.
We've also just had confirmation that Intel is definitely scrapping plans to build a chips factory in the eastern city of Magdeburg. There had been huge hopes pinned to that investment. How much of a blow is this, and what's going to happen to the government investment that went into it?
It's a blow in particular to the region, I would say. Overall, the project was controversial because 10 billion of subsidies were needed to convince Intel to invest there. So it was not the kind of investment you actually want to have. What you want to have is investment of companies who pay taxes, not companies who get subsidies. And what was lacking as well, I suppose, was a plan why we should subsidize semiconductor production. One issue is, of course, the dependence on Taiwan, but it wasn't clear whether this Intel factory would really help us here. It wasn't supposed to be a place where a lot of research would be done. That could be another reason for subsidies. So the plan was to produce chips that at least currently wouldn't be needed by German industry. So the question was really, why should the German taxpayer pay 10 billion to get this factory? It's a blow for the region, but for the country as a whole, I think it's a good thing that the project will not be realized, and it should be a reason to rethink our industrial policy.
It's interesting what you mentioned about research and development. Of these hundreds of billions of euros that the government is now investing in the country, what portion of it can we expect to go into research and development?
Not very much, unfortunately. What the government is doing is increase the tax credit for R&D. But otherwise, it's not clear whether a lot of that is going into our R&D. Probably a significant part of the military spending will go into military-related R&D, but that's an area where we often have dual-use benefits. So technologies developed for the military then can be marketed, have a private use. So my expectation would be the defense spending will stimulate a lot of research, which will also benefit the private sector. The infrastructure package, probably less.
Some analysts are saying that all this defense spending could be good news for German car makers. What is your sense of that?
Yes, it could be, but the sheer size of the car makers is such that the normal kind of military spending on lorries or other vehicles is not enough to compensate for that, I'm afraid. So the industrial capacity is huge. Some transformation will take place and is taking place, but the defense industry is still very small relative to the enormous capacity of the car industry. So the car industry needs to be successful in its traditional markets, in the car market. Transition to defense, going into defense may help in special cases, but it's not going to compensate for difficulties in the car market.
A final question for you, Clemens. What about Germany's image abroad? Do you think this message that Germany is back is being received by foreign investors?
I do, in fact, and that has to do with two things. First of all, a government which is more united now, and a chancellor who communicates better, no doubt about that. And also the issue that the US has become less attractive as a place for investment, for doing business, and a source of uncertainty at the moment at the international level. And so I turned to Germany, quite naturally turned to Germany, not because Germany has changed, but because the others have become less reliable. And that's why I think, yes, Germany is now perceived differently than 2 or 3 years ago.
All right. Clemens Fuest, thank you so much.